Hey folks, so we're starting our next unit on ancient Rome today, and we will begin by looking at the rise of Rome itself. So as always, taking a look at geography, and we'll take a little bit of a look at the kind of timeline and foundings of Rome, and specifically the Roman Republic. The question we'll be looking at this unit is, how do civilizations create strong foundations, and what causes impressive civilizations to fail? So we're going to be looking at that throughout the unit. And if you're following along with your Rise of Rome note, there are several video links that you can watch. So you can either pause this video and go and watch those, or you can simply go back and watch those videos and take notes on them afterwards. And I'll kind of just give you a heads up as to when those videos come into this lecture. So as always, we're going to begin with geography. As I'm sure most of you know, when we're talking about Rome, we're talking about Italy, that boot-shaped peninsula right there that juts out into the Mediterranean. And if you look at this elevation map here, what I want you to do is take a pause and, as always, look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of living in Rome in terms of its geography. Then unpause the video, come on back, and we will chat about it together. Certainly in general, what we're looking at with the Italian peninsula, yes, is that boot shape that juts out into the Mediterranean. Very easy to situate yourself on a map of Europe when you pick out that boot shape. Lots of very easy access because of the waterways to Africa in the south, also to Spain, to France, to the Middle East. So you've got a lot of easy access to a lot of different places. Also on the elevation map, you probably noticed that there are a lot of very mountainous areas in Italy. But there are also a lot of fertile regions, 3 fertile regions in particular, the Po River, the Latium Plain, and the Campania region. The positives of living in Rome, and these should have been things that you probably pretty easily picked out, other than maybe the mild climate, unless you already knew that because you've been lucky enough to go there. It does have a very mild climate, yes. Probably what you notice is there's a lot of good farmland. It's much better than ancient Greece. When we were talking about Greece, we talked a lot about the fact that they have a lot of mountains. Italy, yes, has mountains, but also a lot of really good farmland. So that's obviously very advantageous for them. The mountains are also fairly advantageous in this case because it's really easy for them to build their cities on hills, and that creates a very easily defensible area. So you've got farmland at the base, and then you've got an easily defendable city at the top of the mountain. So they really do use that geography to their advantage. Also, as we discussed, it's a very strategic location in terms of waterways, trade routes, access for conquering new territories. Yes, also access for them to be conquered by others, but certainly for the Romans, them being able to go out and conquer places will be something that we'll be chatting about a lot this unit. Also, the mountains protect them, but don't isolate them, which could be a good thing. In terms of the negatives, there are few natural resources, so you're not looking at an abundance of resources. There are surprisingly few natural harbors as well, so the fact that they are surrounded by water is great, but if you've ever been to Italy, you'll know that a lot of those water edges are actually have a fairly high elevation. So those areas make it a little bit difficult in terms of natural harborways. Other areas have very low coastlines, which make it very easy to invade those areas. So you've got kind of those two different sides in terms of some of the negatives for geography. You've also got the Alps, which are not an effective barrier to the north. So for the Romans, you're looking at a lot of advantageous geographical things going on, but it really is kind of a matter of conquer or be conquered, because yes, they've got a lot of positives, but they're also very open. They don't have the benefit of some of the isolation that other areas that we've looked at have had. So certainly for them, conquer is key. This just gives you a little bit of a timeline in terms of Rome and what we're looking at. And I've picked out a few highlights here in terms of the Greek-Trojan Wars, the first Greek date of the Olympics, the date of the Persian Wars, and then later the Peloponnesian Wars, and then right in here when Alexander the Great takes over. So you can see that a lot of stuff has happened between these sort of yellow areas in terms of ancient Greece. Now when we're talking about ancient Rome, we're actually talking about a much larger time span and a lot of different things going on. We'll focus a little bit on the Republic, and then we'll focus a lot of our time on the Empire and what's really going on with the various emperors of Rome. In terms of the establishment of Rome, because that's where we are going to begin, we're looking at a time between the Greek Dark Ages and the Persian Wars of perhaps a Greek presence on the Italian peninsula, perhaps a Trojan War connection, but certainly you've got in the beginning what appears to be Rome sort of following a Greek city-state model. So how was Rome founded? We're going to look at three different possibilities. One of them is the founding by the Trojan War hero Aeneas. So if you've ever read Virgil's epic poem, the Aeneid, essentially it was commissioned by Emperor Augustus, who we'll talk about much later, to be sort of a combination of the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer. Augustus really wanted Rome to have one of those great epics that all great civilizations in his mind had, and certainly that the Greeks had. So he commissions Virgil to write this story. So Virgil essentially writes the story of the hero Aeneas, who was from Troy. And in this story, essentially Aeneas kind of travels across the Mediterranean and makes his way to the Italian coast, very famously with his father Anchises on his back. This gives you a little map of Aeneas's journey from Troy to Rome-ish. He actually founds Latium, and then it's said to be his later generations, the later generations of Aeneas's family, who found Rome itself, but that the people, the Romans, get there actually by Troy. So if you're thinking about this as an epic foundational story for how Rome came to be, certainly they are trying to link themselves to the ancient Greeks. They're trying to link themselves to that very big epic of the Trojan War and give themselves some heroic ancestors in that sense. And all of that stuff is very important. There is a link on your handout now to watch a little video, the story of the Aeneid, if you want some more, and I do very highly recommend that you watch that so you get a little clip of the story of the Aeneid itself. I wish we had time to read the whole thing. It's really great, so is the Iliad and the Odyssey, but we don't have enough time, so certainly watch that video. Another one, and this is probably one that you're a little bit more familiar with in terms of how Rome was founded, was the birth of Rome in myth. So this is the idea that there was early settlements in the region around sort of 1200 BCE. So we're looking at the same time that you had kind of the Mycenaeans and possibly the Trojan War going on. This is when Rome was established in the Latium region. 753 BCE by the Latins. The legend was that it was settled by Romulus and Remus, and you've got a video to watch to go along with that as well, in terms of these brothers Romulus and Remus setting up, competing against each other, and then finally Romulus winning and being able to found Rome and name it after himself, hence Rome after Romulus. So do go and watch that legend for sure and take some notes on what you notice there and that. Connected to that story is also another story called the Rape of the Sabine Women. And this is essentially when Romulus and his followers, now that Rome has been established by him, he's won over his brother Remus, they want wives and they want families. So what are they going to do? Essentially, in that area, there was already a group of peoples called the Sabine peoples. And the Romans tried to negotiate with the Sabines to get their women. They essentially were like, hey, we need some women. Can you give us some of yours? The Sabines were like, no. Number one, why would we want competition in terms of another group of people setting up here? Two, no, they're our women. So definitely not happening. So they refuse. And obviously then the Romans think this is a little sketchy. Why won't they give us their women? Because you would just assume that they would give them over very easily, or at least the Romans thought that they would. So what the Romans planned to do is they planned to abduct the Sabine women at the Festival of Neptune. So there's this big party. The Romans go in, and it is said that the Sabine women actually wanted the Romans to abduct them, that they were helping out in this because they didn't like the Sabine men, and so that they very easily went over into the hands of the Roman men. But it did happen at the Festival of Neptune. Part of what, at least in terms of legend, part of why the Sabine women were like, okay, this is cool with us, is that Romulus offered women free choice and property rights in order to marry his men. So supposedly this is what happens. You've got that epic founding between the fight of Romulus and Remus, and then they marry with, Romulus and his followers marry with the Sabine women, and that's how families are founded in Rome. Another story is the Etruscans, and this one's got a little bit more weight in terms of historical evidence and accuracy. Here we're looking at about 800 BCE when the Etruscans occupy the region just north of Rome. And you can see this region here in red, just kind of north of where Rome is. Very well-developed society. They have mandatory military service, fine arts. Actually, most people think that this is where the idea for the gladiators came from the Etruscans. And in around 600 BCE, the Etruscans successfully take over Rome. So there is a period of kingship in Rome. And this early kingship, it is said that the kings were supposed to be elected for life. The Romans really did not like these kings, though. The Tarquin kings used a lot of violence, murder, terrorism in order to rule, especially the last king, Tarquinius Superbus. One of the stories around the Tarquin kings that gets them overthrown is that they decide that one of the sons, Tarquin's son Sextus, decides that he really, really wants to have sex with Lucretia, who is married to one of the prominent political men in Rome. And Tarquin, being the father of Sextus, is like, not a great idea. I'm not going to allow that. But Sextus is like, screw it. I don't care. I really want Lucretia, and rapes her. The people of Rome then are in an uproar. They're really angry that the king's son does this, and essentially Tarquin the king is overthrown and expelled from Rome. The important thing about this story, because you can look into these Tarquin kings a lot and they've all got crazy stories connected with them. Again, I wish we had time to talk more about them. Very, very crazy things. But the important thing is that in 509 BCE, this is what supposedly spurs the Romans on to decide that they will never again be ruled by kings. They will never again allow a monarchy or one-man rule within Rome. And so in 509, when the Tarquins are sent away from Rome and when they are overthrown, that's essentially when they create the Roman Republic. You've got a little video link to look at that kind of expulsion and the whole story around that. It's certainly a good idea to look at that recreation, give you a little bit more backstory on the Tarquins and the rape of Lucretia. But the establishing of the Republic is very important. Regardless of how Rome was founded, by 509 BCE, they have founded this Republic, and you guys are going to be looking at several different aspects of the Republican jobs and exactly how it was broken up, and we'll talk later about why it was broken up that way. But this Republic lasts for almost 500 years. It is very successful defending against the Gauls, the Etruscans, the Greeks. They organize their troops very successfully, and by 265 BCE, Rome has conquered all of Italy. So in half of the time of this whole republic, they managed to control all of the Italian peninsula. It is a very successful republic. We will talk about how it falls, obviously, in a few lessons, because ultimately it is replaced by an empire, but it is very successful for 500 years, which is important. When you look at this map here, you can see Rome in 500 BCE, when you've got that idea of the Tarquins, the Etruscans, being kicked out, and then you've got in these two different colors, essentially the territory of Rome by what number is that? 146 BCE, I think, is the final color. So you've got a very large accumulation of land just by the Republic. You're not looking at an empire here where one guy is setting out to make all of these conquests. We will, of course, talk about the Punic Wars and some of the wars that go on with the Republic. But first, what I would like you to look at is how the Republic worked. So take some notes on the different jobs in the Republic using the links that you've been given. Go back and watch the videos from this lecture that you didn't get a chance to watch because they are very interesting and they do give you a lot of information that you might need, hint, hint. So do go back and do that first, and then break up the Republic and try and figure out how it worked in Rome.